You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. Back in 2019, Jason Offutt released Chasing American Monsters, which is an essential book for anyone who loves the subject of cryptozoology. Now Jason has returned with a sequel, Chasing North American Monsters, and takes us from Greenland to Guatemala on the hunt for all kinds of wonderful monsters. But before we join Jason, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mysteriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. And you can also click the link in the show notes as usual. A big thank you to my latest patrons, Dave and Ed, and thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support. It does mean a great deal. You can find Mysteries and Monsters across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can also visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes. Our exclusive merchandise site is available via TeePublic, and you can find the link for that in the show notes as well. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful art, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. As Jason's new book shows us, there are far many more cryptids out there than we could even imagine. In 2019, Jason Offutt released one of the best books in the field of cryptozoology, Chasing American Monsters, which I consider an essential book for anyone interested in this field. Now, thankfully for us, Jason has returned to the cryptid field with Chasing North American Monsters, featuring creatures from the Arctic Circle down to Panama. Jason, I am delighted to finally welcome you to Mysteries and Monsters, sir.
I appreciate the invitation. This is going to be great. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. As I said in the introduction, I think it's always interesting in this modern era when a new book comes out in regards to cryptids. And it was so refreshing to see someone with a real skill for writing with a lovely balance of fact and humour throughout their prose, as it were, Jason, that enabled the readers to kind of get into it. I think it's the perfect kind of book for those people unlike ourselves who aren't 99% convinced Bigfoot's real.
Right. I have a hard time not injecting humor in things that I write because people take themselves too seriously. And what's the fun in that? Right? And when it comes to cryptids, it's absolutely ripe for plucking when it comes to humor. There's because some of the monsters are absolutely silly. Some of the encounters can be silly, but I do take the monsters I write about seriously. And Bigfoot, you've got Bigfoot. The words Bigfoot behind you. Yeah, right there we go. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the big hairy guy, and think that at some point that's going to be the cryptid that's going to get that science is going to finally say yes, they exist. So I do even though I try to inject humor, I still take this seriously.
I suppose one of the great strengths you have, Jason, in your career is that you've obviously been involved in journalism, both as a journalist and now teaching this subject. Do you think that gives you a better sort of clarity in regards to this, of knowing how to find that balance? Because I think sometimes people can be a bit po-faced about cryptids, you know. I sometimes can be a little bit too precious about particular creatures around the world, but I think sometimes you've got to pull the leg of the subject, really, because like you say, there are some ludicrous creatures. I mean, there's obviously one in this current book that you've got out, the Fresno Nightcrawlers, which is one of my particular favourites, because it's so stupid that it just doesn't make any sense. It's essentially a giant pair of walking pants.
Right, exactly. That's because that's what they look like. A giant pair of walking trousers. Yes, absolutely. But along with the journalism, I mean, I hope I'm using it fine, because I've spent 37 years cumulatively of my career as a journalist. So I'm glad it's coming out. I try to approach all these monsters, it just with any nonfiction that I write, from a journalistic point of view. because I want to answer the questions that I can and that people may have. I also want to make it as entertaining and easy to read as I can as well.
I think it's also tantamount to the success and the quality of the first cryptid book you did. I suppose this one has kind of expanded the scope, as it should do, really. And I'm always delighted when people understand that North America doesn't stop at the southern and northern borders of the United States. There are numerous countries and territories all around it. And so it's really refreshing. And if honestly, it seems that you've focused more on everything outside of the border of the USA than you have, because most of the states you've included in this particular volume, you've got one particular cryptid, and there's a couple of states where you've got more than that, obviously, but there's a lot of knowledge for anybody who doesn't know about creatures from Belize or the Mexican areas or some of the countries in the Caribbean. It's refreshingly brilliant to see that level of depth there.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to repeat anything, of course. I had 251 monsters in Chasing American Monsters, and it's from every single state. So they're from 50 states. I wanted to repeat nothing, but I also wanted to include those states again, and I was able to find at least one monster from each state, and as you said, sometimes two or three. But since that volume already exists, I wanted to explore Canada as much as I could, and Greenland and Mexico and down through Central America, because yes, North America, Arctic Circle all the way to Panama.
Do you think, as someone that enjoys cryptozoology as much as many of us do, Jason, that it for the North American continent, this is one of the biggest issues, because most people will tend to focus on the rock stars of the scene, really. We've got Bigfoot, we've got Dogman, and we've got notable lake monsters in both the US and Canada that hog the headlines. And sometimes it's quite difficult to get past that and try and talk to people about strange creatures in Belize or Panama, for example. But it does show you that the cultural influence of cryptids isn't just a pop culture modern phenomena based on American TV, which is often sometimes what the skeptical dismissal of this subject is.
Right, yeah. Because no, it is, and more people. I think the one thing that American TV has done with ghosts, UFOs, and cryptids is made it more acceptable to talk about them in a larger scale. When I did my first paranormal book, Haunted Missouri, back in 2006 is when I was researching it. There was a section of the state that is highly Baptist, and they didn't want to talk about ghosts at all. So I've got one part in the southeastern corner that doesn't have any ghost stories, and I know there are ghost stories down there. Nobody would talk to me. And as the years have progressed, and I've done more stories about cryptids, more books, more articles. People have been more open to talking to me about it because they know they're not going to be made fun of, because that doesn't happen on most of these shows, and it won't happen with me.
I suppose as a journalist, is it frustrating sometimes to see how churlish the subject is often treated in the mainstream press? There's a couple of notable exceptions to this, which often surprises me. Atlas Obscura seem to do some rather good articles about particular subjects without kind of saying that anybody talking about this is an idiot. But Popular Mechanics often surprises me with the depth and scope of the articles that they do about certain things that you would sometimes wonder, is everything all right at the Popular Mechanics office? Or has the boss gone away for the weekend and everybody's got, brilliant, we can do a really big article about Bigfoot now? Right.
No, that's a great point. Atlas Obscura, they do a fantastic job there. Just a couple of months ago, I was interviewed for a piece on for that Atlas Obscura. But yeah, when it comes to Popular Mechanics, I will read something. I'm like, why is this here? But it's funny because when I used to work in the newspaper industry, our boss was gone one week, and there was a gentleman who claimed to have seen Bigfoot. We got that in the paper. It wouldn't have happened if the boss had been in town, but no, it did happen. But one of the things about journalism, and this has upset me for a long time, there have been periods to where the press has treated these subjects seriously. Ghosts were treated, ghost Ouija boards, all that was treated seriously back when the spiritualist movement was going on. The airships back in 1896, I think it was. I've read a number of those articles. That was treated seriously. From World War II with the Foo Fighters up through the 1950s, there were some really important UFO encounters. The U.S. Capitol got buzzed in 1952. I don't remember when the battle for Los Angeles was, but there were a lot of UFOs over Los Angeles, enough that the Army was shooting at them. So they were treated seriously then. In the late 60s and early 70s, Bigfoot was treated seriously. But then it stopped. And I have a class that I teach at the university once every 4 or 5 years. It's called paranormal journalism. And what I wanted to do, and this is what I tell the students who sign up for it, is that I want to teach you how to cover a Bigfoot encounter, or a haunted house, or something in the sky somebody reported seeing. I want you to treat it as seriously as you would a car accident or a city council meeting or something serious, because it is. We don't know what they saw. We know what they say they saw, but my gosh, I've talked to plenty of people who have witnessed something paranormal, and I could tell that they were scared because they had seen something. They had experienced something unknown, and the students glammed onto that, and they were really serious about it. Yeah, because a lot of times, if there's a Bigfoot sighting, there's going to be a reference to Harry and the Hendersons, or you hear the X-Files music going on, and it's like, come on, no, that. I don't care what the rest of the story is. You started out making fun of it, so nobody's going to take it seriously. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Man, that was a long-winded answer. You have to watch out. I lecture for a living.
Hey, that's all right. We're all for long, wordy answers here, my friend. Don't you worry about that, Jason. I mean, I think this is often the thing that gets completely overlooked when we talk about this particular subject, when you have someone who's willing to come forward and talk about it. As you say, Jason, I'm often struck when it comes to certain reports. Bigfoot is a prime example, where you will get people who you can visibly see are emotionally traumatized by something. And they're the ones, for me, that often elevate an experience to a different level, because it's easy sometimes to create a crazy story, and they can often go a little too far, and it becomes incredulous. But sometimes you can see a story where someone's really struggling to get the words out. They start to well up, shake. You can see them sweat. And it's not just necessarily in regards to Bigfoot. There are numerous examples of this particular phenomenon. And straight away you think you're removing that from that person by ridiculing them straight away. And therefore, they're not going to want to talk about that anymore. And the history of this particular subject is littered with people who came forward saying, this is what's happened to me, here's the story. And then they've just been made an absolute idiot of in the press, on local TV, and even other major syndicated shows.
And for as a journalist, it's embarrassing to me to see journalists treating the people they're interviewing like that. It's unprofessional, and it's right off the bat ridiculing somebody for witnessing something none of us really know anything about. Okay, we students in the field of the paranormal, we know what research and experience has shown us. Most people out there don't have that, which is why we can treat it a little bit more seriously. Or if it needs to be made fun of, we've got a solid basis. Okay, I've always said, because people have asked me, how do you tell when somebody's lying? And I'm usually like, I was a journalist for 17 years working in the field, and I've got 5 kids. I'd like to think to know if somebody's lying. All right. Okay. So I think I'm a pretty good judge of this. And if somebody, like we were talking about, looks scared, just is hesitant to talk about it, doesn't really want to give their real name, which means to me that they don't want publicity, I'm more than likely to take their word that they experienced something that they can't explain. Yeah, but if I interview somebody and they claim to have had a ghost encounter, there's a portal in their bathroom that's not the toilet. They've seen Bigfoot and given JFK a back rub within the last 10 years. Then I'm like, wait a second, we better step back from this.
Well, yes. I mean, I remember once, Jason, many years ago when I first got a Kindle and I was looking for some books. One of the main reasons was it was really hard at the time to get Linda Godfrey's books in the UK at that time. You either had to get them from the States and wait a month and pay enormous import taxes, or you just didn't get them. And I remember struggling across a book, and after about 6 chapters, I just thought, is there anything this chap hasn't seen? And it was ridiculous. It was all kinds of stuff. And I just thought, is this the field I'm going to be delving into here? Is this... Obviously now I know that there's lots of things like that, but people's reputations do tend to precede them. And so obviously the more you do it, the more aware of who to follow and who to sort of dismiss, I suspect.
Right, and I've got the list. I've got my own personal list on who I don't listen to anymore. And a couple of them are a shame because when they first started in the field, they had some really good research. They had good information. And then they just kind of lost the handle on it and liked the publicity so much. They started coming up with, George Adamski did this back in the, 50s or 60s. He said a few things and people were like, oh, yeah, let's listen to him. And then he started making up all sorts of wild and crazy stories. So, yeah, there are definitely people out there you don't want to listen to. And one of those types of people, and this is another thing I tell my students, is if they say they know 100% what Bigfoot is, what UFOs are, what ghosts are, stop listening to them right then. None of us know. We have good ideas, but we don't know exactly what these things are.
Exactly. Well, I think a good place to start in regards to this is one of these things that's a very strange conundrum, and as I just mentioned Linda Godfrey earlier, is this whole dogman, wolfman, werewolf, gloop-garoo, roo-garoo, wherever, conundrum that seems to come because these days, I think if you've followed this particular subject for as long as we probably have, Jason, and being of a very similar vintage, sir, that you can see Dogman just essentially turn up from nowhere at the beginning of the 90s, really. Right. Although there were sporadic stories that you could stumble across in American press and Canadian areas as well. It seems to have become omnipresent in the cryptozoological field now. It is everywhere. And if anything, it's probably the one thing that runs Bigfoot close as the most popular cryptid in North America, I suspect.
Right now, it is. And you're right, they appeared in Michigan. It was the Michigan Dog Man back in the 90s. And then Linda Godfrey, and her stories, her reporting, she was a reporter at a small town newspaper in southern Wisconsin, and she was getting the sheriff's report, and the sheriff mentioned something about somebody seeing a dog or a wolf that walked on its hind legs, and she asked more about it, and he goes, well, we got a whole file of reports. Do you want to see it? Okay, these people were sure enough about what they saw. They went to the police. You don't go to the police with a story like this, unless you actually saw what you saw or you think you did. So when she reported on all these encounters, I give that a little bit more credence than just a random person, saying, hey, I saw this. But I'm going to lump dogmen in with a couple of other paranormal type creatures because of the fact that I can wrap my head around Bigfoot. Okay? If Bigfoot is an extant species of human, one of our relatives, if it is a type of North American ape, or not just North America, because Bigfoot's all over the world, all over the planet, I can still understand Bigfoot. I get that. A bipedal dog, that I don't, natural. Bigfoot could be natural. A bipedal dog, not so much. However, I'm going to put it in the same category as Slender Man and black-eyed kids. The reason for this being black-eyed kids, reports of those started in 1998. A journalist named Brian Bethel, I interviewed him a couple of times, saw a couple of black-eyed kids and was scared to death by them. And he put it on his story on the internet. And then all of a sudden it kind of exploded. Slender Man is an entirely fictional creation. It was it was for a contest to create a monster. And this person created this monster and it won and it took off. But people have reported seeing these. Yes. Even Slender Man, multiple Slender Man reports. I am speculating here. I'm not one of those people who say I know anything. I just know what I've researched, but I'm speculating that there could be some sort of energy, some sort of entity that knows what is in the zeitgeist, knows what we're talking about, and will appear as that. Be it an elemental, be it we're creating it, like tulpas are created. We might be creating it, with just because we're thinking about it so much. So, I mean, again, that's way out there kind of thought, but I have a hard time explaining these, and that kind of helps me, gather my thoughts.
Well, I kind of agree with you, Jason, because it is the one I have the most difficulty with, really, because we don't really have anything in the fossil record that would lead us to, yes, we've got giant wolves or of various shapes and sizes, and even in the modern era, people are often surprised at how large actual timber wolves are. I think everybody thinks that wolves are the same size as dogs, and when they see a real timber wolf that's spent its entire life in the wild, they are amazingly stunning creatures, but they're enormous. And I think some people just don't take that for granted, I think. They just presume they're the same size as a husky or something for some reason. And it's difficult for me. I completely get what you're saying, because it's so weird and it's so alien to the natural world. I mean, we've got a spate going on here along the east coast of the United Kingdom, where people are claiming to have very similar encounters with bipedal dog-like creatures. Why? Where? Wolves essentially were eradicated from this country about 500 years ago, and yet these areas where these things are happening all have names going back to the Vikings and when the Norse arrived here, talking about wolves and certain areas. And so these sightings seem to be around these particular areas. And a couple of my friends have become really enmeshed in this research about it. They're not saying that there's giant werewolves running around the east coast of Britain. What they are saying is, like you've just said there, is this some kind of energy manifesting itself as something that terrifies people? Is it some kind of tulpa, like you say? And because people talk about the dogman so often, it's giving it more strength to appear as that? Or, like you say, is this some kind of elemental or the fae that's tapping into the zeitgeist that's going, oh, well, that's the one that seems to scare people the most these days. I'll do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I wouldn't, that's not something you can necessarily prove, honestly, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was what's happening. Because, I mean, it's not just happened with cryptids. I mean, what about there was a UFO flap across the United States in 1973. Well, maybe maybe we caused that ourselves. I don't know, through this, topic thought. I have read about various authors. The one that comes to mind is I can't remember his name, but he came up with the the comic book anti-hero Constantine. And I read something about him going to a coffee shop, and he was sitting at the coffee shop, and Constantine, exactly who he had come up with, walked through, bought a cup of coffee, turned and looked at him and nodded and left. And from what from what the story said, he was convinced that was his creation. And I think this is something that as a writer, and I also write fiction, that kind of worries me a bit.
There are lesser characters you'd want to upset than Constantine,
Right.
as a fan of that particular series. Yeah, John's not someone to muck about, so I wouldn't like to get on his wrong side. But it is intriguing, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And so it kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say it kind of contradicts itself when we talk about the dog man. But it is a mystifying thing. But I also, like you say, I think the fact that some of these are initial witnesses when the stories first started coming out, the late 80s, early 90s, you can sense the fear in these people. And there's, as you say, one of the strangest aspects I often find about the whole dogman phenomena is that people seem to be aware of how strong it is, how quick it is, how ferocious it is. But nobody ever seems to get really hurt or attacked. They get terrified, they get chased, and it's almost as if it's playing with them. And you would say, when we look at some other cryptids that people have had encounters with, numerous skirmishes with Bigfoot all over the place, some very famous cases. You've got other cryptids that have allegedly attacked people or tried to attack people. Lizard Man, and down in the southeast is a prime example of that.
South Carolina was a famous case of the Lizard Man, yeah.
Yes, absolutely, which just seemed to be a crazy summer. But that was one of those where all of a sudden there seemed to be a history there that nobody was talking about until it kind of did something that nobody could dismiss anymore. I think it was the car that got chewed to pieces.
There were claw marks in the car. The car antenna got broken, and yeah, there were some other things. And the young man, I think he was 17 or 18, immediately went to the police. It's another one of those things that you go to the police. You don't do that unless you're serious. Especially if you're a 17, 18-year-old kid. My gosh, I'd be scared to go to the police station.
Absolutely. And especially, I mean, it's bad enough going to the police station for a normal situation, Jason. Right. Not that, right. Yeah, I was changing a flat tire and a lizard man tried to kill me.
Right. Exactly. Well, things like, okay, that lizard, that encounter has what what we're talking about is physical evidence. With Bigfoot, I mean, there's enough physical evidence that Bigfoot is out there that if you had that same amount of evidence in a courtroom trial, somebody's going to go to jail because of that amount of evidence. But when it comes to the dog man, are there any bones? Are there any footprints? Scat? I mean, hair? Is there any? I don't know of any encounter that has resulted in any physical evidence. And if people are, dig up some fossil, well, here's fossil evidence. Look at this huge dog. Well, I think science would be able to say, but if it's a dog man, bipedal, its hips don't work that way. The hips would have to be formed differently for it to be able to stand up, like they're describing. So, yeah, dog man, I'm pretty iffy on.
I'm always confused. I've heard people in the past say, well, dogmans aren't werewolves. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute.
What's the difference?
How do we know?
Yeah, we don't. We don't. It looks like one. Yeah.
It is a peculiar standpoint to take, I think, Jason. As you said earlier, if somebody says they're an expert or they know 100% what something is, then we should always take that with a large pinch of salt. And I think when you've got people arguing about the semantics of, well, no, it's not a dogman, that's a werewolf, because werewolves don't live there, is grasping at very thin straws.
I would believe more that a dogman could exist than a werewolf, because when it comes to the werewolf, then we're talking about good, evil, spiritual sort of thing. That's why I don't like when people talk about the spiritual or interdimensional Bigfoot. Okay, you're using unknowns to explain another unknown. Let's look at Bigfoot as a flesh and blood creature. Figure out if it is or not before we go off on these other avenues. I'm the same with UFOs. I think they're nuts and bolts craft, and you got to show me they're not before I'll agree with you.
I think that's the problem. Is because people are terrified to say they don't know, Jason, or they can't give a full explanation, that they suddenly start to leap into these weird tangents, like you say, about it being transdimensional, or obviously a lot of it refers back to Keel's work and its ultra-terrestrials, or you've got people now talking about parallel dimensions that intersect, quantum mechanics. These are subjects that even very knowledgeable physicists and scientists struggle to comprehend, and yet you'll have people who chase Bigfoot trying to explain it all away as quantum mechanics, when I would imagine the world's leading expert in quantum mechanics doesn't really understand it.
Right. It's like, okay, Doug, you're a carpenter. You're not a physicist. You can't use that to explain it. Well, and this is, I was kind of on those lines too when I was talking about, explaining things away as tulpas. But again, I'm saying that makes sense to me. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but at least tulpas have some historic, they're talked about in a historic record. Of course, we don't know if they were true, but still there's some reference to them, in the past. But anyway, we've already been down that road.
I suppose when you're pulling a book like this together as well, Jason, especially building off the back of your first foray into this field, was it a case of there were some that you missed the first time round and you thought, I've definitely got to have that in? Or, as I touched on earlier on in regards to some of the weirder ones, Fresno Nightcrawler is one, the Loveland Frogman is another. There are certain ones that are just so strange. I mean, there's obviously the famous leprechaun from Alabama as well, which is one of my particular favourites, because that story makes no sense on any level, but it's amazingly entertaining.
Right, and I definitely included the Alabama leprechaun because of the news report. It was so entertaining. Everybody who's seen the leprechaun go, yay! That was good stuff. I included the Fresno Nightcrawler because I hadn't heard of it before, and I just when I was looking for new monsters, I stumbled across it, and I couldn't believe that this I'd missed it, and it was so bizarre because as we talked earlier, that they were like walking pairs of trousers, Okay, let's write about that. That is so weird. Another one that I saw was that I had to get in was a bear man from Texas, and because we got the dog man, why not a bear man, especially in a place that doesn't have very many bears at all. So. And of course there was a story of, a family had a log cabin, and the husband was gone. The wife went outside to do something with the goats and got kidnapped by a bear that walked on two legs. How could I not use that story? Right?
Well, I suppose that on a tangent, Jason, there is a strange selection of stories about people that seem to encounter bears that don't act like bears. We had the young child 2 or 3 years ago who disappeared
in North Carolina,
and 3 days later and was told and said a bear helped me.
Right, exactly. Yes, he was playing in his grandmother's house with his siblings, and the siblings went inside. He didn't, and then he was just gone. And there was a swamp behind the grandmother's house. And people went out and searched for 2 or 3 days. It got down into the mid-30s Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in Celsius because they never taught us that in school here in the U.S.
Cold.
No, it's cold. Yes,
cold,
it's cold.
Jason.
It's cold.
All you need to know.
Yeah. So it got down to where it was, cold enough that he would have suffered quite a bit, maybe even died of exposure. But after, I think it was, like I said, 3 days, he was found in a briar patch, yelling out, and he was clean, basically fed, and he said that a bear took care of him and cuddled him and kept him warm. That's not a bear behavior.
No. I saw people arguing about that, saying, well, it might have. And I just think, well, obviously you'll occasionally, as with most wild animals, Jason, there will on occasion be very strange interactions between humans and what you would consider to be a large predator that defies what should happen on occasion. But that, I'm trying to think, he was called Casey, I think, that kid. But when I heard that story, that obviously reminded me of the famous Sarah Witcher story from the 19th century, which is essentially the same thing, where she got lost and was claimed to have been saved by a bear that fetched her berries.
Right. Well, was that in the United States, that case? Did it have to do with, I'm trying to think, was it David Paulides, Missing 411, who talked about that? Because it's very similar to a case in, I think it was the early 1900s, maybe, at a logging camp. And this little, I think it was a 3-year-old girl, was with her dad as they were logging, and she'd ride the truck up to the top of the hill, and she'd run back. And then one time she didn't run back. And when they finally found her a few days later, she said, the big dog ate my hat, but fed me berries. But I don't remember if that's the right name or not, but it's similar to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. I think the Sarah Witcher one's even older than I think, which was up in New Hampshire. But I know that one because the thing that always struck me about that particular story was it ate my hat.
Mm-hmm. Right, it ate my hat.
And then just went on. But these are stories where that shouldn't happen. I know some people would say that even animals' maternal instincts can sometimes take over. And you do see occasions where animals will adopt what you would consider to be prey. Mm-hmm. There's examples of leopards and baby antelopes. Right. And
there have been cases historic cases of children in the woods. Their parents, left them in the woods because they couldn't take care of them, and they were raised by monkeys, or they were raised by wolves, just like Mowgli, the wolf boy. There are actual cases like that. So yeah, it does happen. But how is a bear or a dog going to feed a child berries? And would a 3-year-old child be able to tell the difference between a bear and a Bigfoot? I'm thinking probably not.
Exactly. As far as they're concerned, it's just something big and hairy. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anybody's actually done a test, Jason, of 3- and 4-year-olds and said, right, shown them a picture of a Bigfoot and said, what creature's that? Because that would be interesting, because they wouldn't have the cultural reference or the knowledge to say, oh, that's not a bear, it's a Bigfoot, because they've probably never seen either.
Right. When my kids were 3, they would have. But you're right. That would be an interesting study to see done.
Because I think it's one of those things that there are certain cases and things where people will put forward pictures of certain creatures and people will say, oh, it looked like that. And they go, right, well, that conclusively proves what it was. And
an example, and I'm going to butcher this name, but Mokalia Mamimbe.
Yeah.
The natives, the pygmies down in who've reported seeing that for years, the sauropod dinosaur looking creature, were shown pictures of a sauropod dinosaur, and they were like, yep, that's it. And there are people who have, like in the Ropin in Papua New Guinea, which looks like a pterodactyl. The locals, were shown pictures of a pterodactyl, and they were like, that's a Ropin. It would be really difficult to say dinosaurs were still around. But there's got to be some place in the world where it maybe could have happened. I'm not sure if sky or land dinosaurs could still exist, but our oceans are so unexplored. There might be dinosaurs down there. Because they discovered the coelacanth after it had been missing for 65 million years. They discovered it. What else could be down there?
Absolutely. There's always outliers there. There are creatures around here that have been with us as long as there's been life on Earth, it seems. Horseshoe crabs, crocodiles have essentially barely changed other than shrinking, thankfully for us. Yeah. But you only have to look at some of the strange lizard stories that are reported from the Pacific. And if you think of giant lizards living anywhere, it would be on remote archipelagos in the middle of the Pacific with nothing near it.
Well, back when Western people were exploring the Pacific, the Komodo dragon, they thought it was just some silly superstition, some silly legend, until they saw this enormous monitor lizard. There are plenty of things that are out there that are hidden. I am extremely interested in little people, the Fae folk, because what civilization, what culture hasn't had them? Okay, all throughout Europe, trolls and leprechauns, elves, fairies, brownies, sprites, hobgoblins, tomties, all these things. But they were also the same description in the United States that the Native Americans have had before, the Europeans settled. I mean, same stature, same appearance, same behavior. Okay, that's kind of neat. And then we had in Indonesia, the island of Flores, back about 15, 20 years ago, the natives had talked about Ibu Gogo, this diminutive human that would steal their children and eat them. And, Western science is like, oh, that's a silly story, until they found the remains of these, 3-foot tall humans. And they named them Homo florensis, and they called them hobbits. And, that made me happy when they discovered that, because if they exist there, what about these other stories? They could still be here.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's probably one of the best examples in the modern era where we've had a belief system that's been dismissed as a tall tale or a legend, Jason, that has been proven correct. Now, that just because you find it somewhere doesn't mean everything else that people claim to see around the world is true, but it certainly gives a bit more credence, because often it's quite frustrating, because I think people forget how little knowledge we really have when it comes to talking about strange creatures or dinosaurs or our ancestors in any level, because we've been doing it for like 200 years, really. Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah. Because prior to that, you can understand why people who would stumble across the leg of a brontosaurus may think that the world was populated by a race of giants 1,000 years ago. Whereas now we know, yes, there were giants, but most of them were lizards and birds that were just terrifyingly large. And thankfully, the meteor came and saved us. It would even started evolution again. But you see this kind of giganticism that occurs all across the animal kingdom, happens in humans. It's very rare, but it does occur. And so the discovery at Florensis just kind of gave us that love monsters a bit more tangible proof to hold on to, that, well, if that's true, somebody somewhere else must be telling the truth about their particular creature, no?
Exactly. Well, the the history is riddled with cases of legends being true, like the mountain gorilla, the giant panda, the okapi, creatures like this. In English, British scientists back in the day, when they were sent platypus, they were convinced that they took 3 animals and sewed it together, Yes. So, seeing something like that, like the megamouth shark. Here we have an 18-foot long shark, and they get bigger than that, but around 18 foot long. It wasn't discovered by science until 1977. Okay? In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in the Billy Forest, Bili, we have the Billy apes. The locals said for years that there are these giant chimpanzees that behaved like gorillas, howled at the moon, and could kill and eat a leopard. And Western science finally went in, and they're like, oh my gosh, they actually exist. And that was 96. And, I'm an old man, so it wasn't that long ago for me.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, even things as you would say, as normal as a leopard, the legends around the king leopard were dismissed for years, Jason, that the local African country populations would talk about there would be leopards and then there would be the king, and its markings were different. That wasn't caught on film till the late 70s and finally proved that those people were telling the truth. And I think sometimes it's difficult for the local populace of any country, I think, when they're dealing in the face of scientific knowledge. They're often dismissed out of hand because they're not educated people on a certain level, and therefore they're just told tales. It's folklore. But it keeps happening over and over again, that eventually we find the proof that shows that these people have always been telling the truth. We just weren't listening.
Exactly. And there are people are going to think, a lot of people probably think today because they're not educated in this sort of thing, that we've already discovered everything. We've mapped the planet. We know what lives everywhere. And the United States, just by itself, more than 45% of it is uninhabited. People are just visitors there. They don't live there all the time. We've got, giant, vast tracts of desert and mountains and lush pine forests that people probably haven't set foot on in 200-300 years. We don't know what lives there. And Canada, most of the 80% of the population's along the U.S. border. Everything north of there. There's a lot of wilderness. There's a lot of wilderness in Mexico. There's a lot of wilderness in South America. My gosh, I'm scared to think about how much unexplored or uninhabited land is in Africa. People don't really know how big Africa is. That continent is enormous. So there are so many unexplored places on land that these creatures could be hiding. We just haven't found them.
I think one of the things I miss as well, Jason, is that often everything gets bunched together now. And obviously, I believe you grew up in Missouri, which famously in the 70s had its own specialised hairy hominid, which is Momo. Mm-hmm. I miss the time where certain areas, now everything gets called Bigfoot. Right. Whereas in the 60s and 70s, you would have a designated name for each particular creature.
The Ohio grassman. You'd have, the wood devils in New Hampshire. Yeah, you'd have different names for all of these. And I'm glad you brought up Momo, because this is something that really, really kind of bothers me. Okay, yes, 1973 Momo was witnessed for a couple of weeks, terrorized this small town of Louisiana, Missouri. It is on the Mississippi River.
Yes.
Momo left footprints. They were three-toed footprints. All right.
Yes.
And as I was researching Chasing American Monsters, I discovered that down in Louisiana, the Honey Island Swamp Monster, another local name for Bigfoot, also left three-toed footprints, also along the Mississippi River. North of that, between Missouri and Louisiana, we've got Arkansas, that in the 1960s, I think late 60s, the folk monster, which was turned into the movie Legend of Boggy Creek, three-toed footprints. There were also along near the Mississippi River. In Iowa, north of Missouri, there have been Bigfoot reports that left three-toed footprints. The same in Minnesota, which is just north of that, all along the Mississippi River. So, what is this? I understand a five-toed Bigfoot. A three-toed Bigfoot, not so much, but these could all be the same family, the same type, because there are a bunch of different types of these creatures. And if these three toads have been seen all along the Mississippi River, I mean, that could be its route. That, it could travel north in the summer and come back south in the winter.
I never realised the correlation, because as soon as you said it, the first one that popped into my head was obviously some of the footprints found at Folk are three-toed, which is what kind of separates it from some of the other Bigfoot stories, especially the ones in the south, because the skunk ape is supposed to be your standard five-toed hominid, and I know some of the other ones going across the southern borders into Texas is your standard Bigfoot. Some of them are skinnier than others. But yeah, I've never realised that correlation between the Mississippi and three-toed tracks in these flap areas.
Yeah, when I was doing the research and I noticed that was mind-blowing to me. And I'm going to throw another thing on this. In Canada, there have been reports of giant, like 10 to 18 foot tall, hairy, bipedal, three-toed creature that also walked on four legs at some point, but it could walk on two legs. I don't remember the native name for it, the First Nations name, but it has something to do with beaver eater, because they rip open the beaver dams and eat the beavers. In Belize, we've got a three-toed monster that fits that. They're called cave cows.
Yes. Yeah.
Then we've got in South America another name that, by gosh, I'd butcher, so I'm not going to do it. It has the same description. The interesting thing here is that South America and North America both had a species of enormous ground sloth back in the Pleistocene. 3 claws. They could stand on it just from their looking at their skeletal structure. They could stand on their hind legs. You know, maybe these three-toed Bigfoot all up and down the Mississippi River, maybe they're giant ground sloths. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying that's what I believe. I'm just saying things fit together for me.
Yes,
it's interesting
absolutely.
to think about.
Oh, very much so. And I think that, once again, that this is another modern discovery, really, because whilst we knew about sloths and some of them were larger in the Pleistocene area, as you say, when they accidentally came across the caves, which were discovered by chance by a guy who was driving past a building site, and he thought, "What's that hole in the wall there?" and said, "Can I have a look?" And they said, "Yeah, of course you can." And he went in and he went, "This is amazing," because you could see all the grooves in the ceiling that it was a burrow. And then I think I was watching something the other week about this, and they were mapping it out, and it ended up being like a network of 150 miles worth of caves that were all interconnected, that had all been built by the giant ground sloth. And you think, as you mentioned earlier, Jason, how undiscovered really South America is. You know, if they can only just find a major city there last year, what are the chances they're going to stumble across a giant ground sloth living in some remote part of the Amazon still?
Exactly. You know, if any news report came out saying we discovered this in the Amazon, all right, I'm believing you, because so the Amazon River basin is so enormous and so clouded thick with trees, and as you said, they just discovered a Mayan city. I mean, if you can hide a city with a forest, I mean, yeah, what else can you hide? Yeah.
I suppose as well, one of the tendencies is, were you surprised to see, as you touched on some of the correlations and constants that we find from distant cultures all around the world talking about similar things, they just have different names for it. How many of these outer lying regions of North America, some of these other countries, they all have very similar creatures there that in North American terms you would consider them to be similar to Bigfoot, because this is often the thing, and as you touched on earlier, we both know the reports of Russia, China, all across Australia with the Yowies. You've got stories from South and Central America.
Yes.
Most continents have a population of hairy hominids of some description.
All of them except Antarctica. But even Sri Lanka and New Zealand have their own Bigfoots. I mean, they're islands. I mean, how did you wind up there?
Well, I mean, this is one of those things because, as you say, there is this presumption that we've discovered everywhere, we've mapped everywhere. And as I've always said before, if you're flying over the jungle and taking a picture of it, that's great. But you've no idea what's under the canopy. Right. That's not mapping. That's just showing me the treetops.
Right. No. Yeah. Underneath rainforest or even I mentioned the thick pine forest up in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, yes, you can't take a picture from above. You've got to be down on the ground. But when you're down on the ground, that is mile after mile after mile of nothing but trees and wildlife. No people, generally. You never can know what you're going to stumble across. That's why a whole lot of these creatures I get excited about, because of the possibility that they're out there. And you mentioned Bigfoot in other cultures. I was talking earlier about Fae folk in other cultures. Same with dragons. There are dragon legends from all over the place. Quetzalcoatl from down in the Aztecs. The Piazza from from Illinois and Missouri. We've got still dragons in South America, all throughout Africa. Europe, especially in out in Asia. I mean, I don't believe that there were dragons, but how could these feathered serpents or winged lizards that fit the same description? I mean, how could these cultures have come up with those?
And that's always the fascination. Dragons are one of those things, like vampires, I think.
That's another one that is all over the world. I've come across vampires, and not necessarily werewolves, but shapeshifters. That's a really common cryptid. The creepiest one is in the Amazon River Basin. It is a river dolphin that turns into a man and goes into town to look for a wife.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. A sexy shapeshifter.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I suppose, was it surprising, even though you love this subject, Jason, both as a writer and as a fan of the subject of cryptozoology, when you're looking at these places, as we said, some of the countries and that often get overlooked in North America, is it surprising to see these trends, this cross-pollination of ideas that can't have come through popular culture, because these stories predate television, books. They are entrenched in that culture for generations and centuries.
Right. We had in Pennsylvania, in the coal mines, the people who wanted the who opened the mines wanted the best miners, so they got them from Cornwall. And
yes,
the Cornish miners had a story about Tommyknockers, which are diminutive miners. They dressed like them. The miners who would steal their lunch, misplace their tools. If the miners brought them beer and food, they would lead them to, a rich deposit. If the miners, treated them poorly, said bad things about them, they might cause a cave-in or cause the miners to get lost. That story came over with them. That story of the Tommyknockers was not in North America until the Cornish miners came over. In California, during the 1849 gold rush, some of the miners went to California, and of course we had Tommyknocker legends. The thing that gets me is the fact that before any of this happened, down in the Andes, I'm having it because I just wrote about this a couple of months ago. Anyway, the area of the Andes, the people who lived there, they mined silver and gold.
Mm-hmm.
They had the exact same story. They didn't call it the Tommyknocker, but they were diminutive miners who dressed like the miners in the Andes, and they would either lead them to a deposit or get them lost or cause a cave-in, and they would hide food, they would hide tools, and if you appeased them with wine and sweets, they would help you with your mining. That's before the Europeans showed up. Before Europeans showed up in South America, how could these two exact legends be in these two different places? It blows my mind.
I always find the little things like that often get overlooked, but it is fascinating how there is this kind of permeation of beliefs or associated phenomenon that seems to transcend the modern era, which I just find you could understand it now because it happens all over the place. But when you start unpicking those, they're the ones that really give you pause for thought, Jason.
Right, and it's another one I'm gonna throw out there. It's gonna be in a book coming out next year, Chasing the World's Monsters, hopefully Volume 1. But it's the Ziti, I believe that's what it's called. It's an old Chinese story about it. It looks like a rug. Okay.
Yes.
And it can be up to about six feet long. And if you walk by it too closely, it rears up. It's got claws all around the outside like a fringe, and it can wrap around you, and it's got suckers on the bottom, and it sucks your blood. There is an identical story from a lake in South America. Identical. And it's from, again, an old story before, we had across the sea contact, at least that we know of.
Yes. There's one I want to pick your brains on, which is from your home state, Jason. Obviously, as I said, you've broken the book down into geographical locations, and you've kind of pushed the states as far down into it as you can, because obviously I think sometimes you can get lost in how many creatures are wandering around the mainland 49, as it were. What is it? The Gimlachute? This weird creature that's from your home state? I'd never heard of it.
It's another, it's a dragon. And there's a newspaper in South Missouri that is named that. I could find very, very little about it, but it's just it's an old dragon legend, and it's, well, as any good legend about a monster will be, it's deadly. Yeah, I couldn't really come up with much more than that.
I suppose as well, as we were talking on, one of the things I've always found very interesting is the different tribal nations have these stories about killer babies, which is a very strange thing, whether they're sort of enticing people to come into bodies of water, Jason, or there is the famous one where people will find what they consider a child to be crying and they will pick it up and try and soothe it with their thumb, and then the baby starts to eat them from the thumb up. Which is now also I believe it's like a holiday resort there, but I'm not sure I've come across a story of any trekkers being eaten by children by the water pool there yet.
Well, there is a, this is in somewhere in southwestern United States, it's Tale of Water Babies. And this is where the local Native Americans, if they had a deformed child, or if they had a child, they wanted a boy and got a girl, okay, they would throw it in the lake, and it would drown. And there are, there's legends of the water babies who they'll cry. You will hear them cry, and people will wander out in the lake looking for them, and they themselves will drown. Yeah, any story involving babies is absolutely terrifying. There's one. There's an island in off the coast of one of the Mexican states over on the Pacific side. That this island is known for its witches, and they're male, but they're called witches, and they have a guardian. And they will steal a young male child as their guardian, and over a decade, deform it. And deform it to the extent to where I don't really want to go into what they do because it's hideous, but it guards it guards the cave in which they live. But it's another case of, people doing bad things to babies. I have a feeling, and this is, I mentioned black-eyed kids earlier because, or this kind of fits in with maybe why the children, because if a black-eyed kid knocks on your door and he looks like he's about 8 years old and said, I need to call my mom, your initial thought is I want to help him. Okay. And maybe the same with these baby stories is they really want to, make an impact, really get to somebody's heart. By maltreating a baby in these legends. I mean, that's one of the big rules in fiction. Don't kill a baby.
Yes. Yes. Children and pets.
Leave the pets alone too.
I mean, obviously there's a lot of connection with lake monsters in most bodies of water, Jason. Even the ones that seem to be man-made reservoirs seem to end up very quickly getting a monster. And I often find this quite frustrating because I think it takes away from places like Lake Okanagan or Lake Champlain, where I think there might be something very strange there. Not necessarily a monster, but maybe, as we were saying, about the depths of the ocean, because they're enormous bodies of water that are connected to oceans. So the possibility of some kind of hybrid being able to come in and go as it pleases is quite understandable, in my opinion. But when you come across some of the more recent ones, it's almost as if you've got a body of water, doesn't matter how old it is, it must have a lake monster, surely. So many big or even medium-sized lakes across North America have these stories. Yes, with, like you said, Lake Okinawa with Ogopogo. There's also,
I can't think of the names. There's like 3 or 4. There's an Igo Pogo. There's also one from a lake in Manitoba that's another pogo, and
it's Manny Pogo. That one. They didn't bother trying too hard for that one, Jason. They just called it Manny Pogo.
They're piggybacking off the Ogo Pogo, I think. Yeah, but the big ones like Ogo Pogo or Champ in Lake Champlain. Yes, you're right. These are enormous bodies of water. The same with Loch Ness. People don't realize how freaking deep and long that lake is. It is enormous. So the chance of there being some type of creature in those, especially like you said, they can connect to the ocean. I think that holds a lot more than, say, Dillon Lake in Colorado, where blue dilly, this creature that looks like a cross between a dolphin and a manta ray, is supposed to live. Yeah, I don't put stock in that that whatsoever. There's supposedly a bipedal dinosaur that lives in a lake down in Florida. But the lake, I did some looking, and the lake's not big enough for any dinosaur to live there. And as you said earlier, there are a number of man-made lakes that have lake monsters, and no, they don't. No, they don't. I'm actually surprised there aren't more lake monsters in the Great Lakes.
Yes.
There's one in Lake Michigan, but those lakes are enormous. They're deep. There's got to be something, I think. Yeah. My favorite lake monster, though, has to do with a story. I don't know if it's true or not. I reported it in Chasing American Monsters. It was in various newspapers back in the 1800s that the Great Salt Lake Great Salt Lake in Utah, some rich man had a couple of humpback whales caught, and he carried them via train and had them dumped into the Great Salt Lake. And people have reported occasionally seeing whales in the lake over the century and a half, but that's a very dubious, dubious story.
Well, it's funny you say that. I remember a few years ago having a bit of a tete-a-tete with someone who was absolutely convinced there was a certain lake in North America with great white sharks in it. And I said, that's absolutely impossible. And they went, no, it isn't. And I said, no, it is. And he went, no, somebody caught one and dropped it in there. It's not impossible. I said, it is. It'd die within minutes.
Yeah, it would live for, a few minutes and it would be gone.
Bull shark, I might have believed you because, they are notoriously clever like that. And obviously there's some very famous footage recently of that golf course in Australia that got flooded and a bull shark ended up in the lake on the golf course.
I remember reading about that.
And people like dismissing that.
And occasionally in the Mississippi River, they will swim up the Mississippi River, not that far. I mean, I don't think anybody in St. Louis or Minneapolis is going to see one, but at least down in Louisiana, the sharks will be in this freshwater river.
Yeah, well, obviously the story that Jaws is based on is a bull shark killing 2 people in a river. So and that's over 100 years ago. So they've been doing it for as long as we've been paying attention, Jason. But I suppose you would suggest that if anybody does come across a bull shark in the Mississippi, they may not be around to tell us about what happened anyway. I suppose with this book, before I let you leave, Jason, has it given you a new favourite cryptid from outside the US? Or is the one that you were aware of and perhaps didn't know as much about that you've got a real appreciation for from one of these lesser known countries' histories?
I kind of like the devil pig from Papua New Guinea. That's a nice one. The orang pindak I'm quite fond of. That's another one. It could be there. People have seen this. Reputable people have seen this. Those I think, and it's hard to call this. It fits in the cryptid realm because it was declared extinct back in, I don't know, was it the 70s or 80s? The thylacine in Australia, the last known thylacine died in the Hobart Zoo in 1938, and it was wasn't declared extinct, I think, until the late 70s. But there have been so many reports of people seeing it. You know, an supposedly extinct animal being rediscovered. That's another one with Bigfoot. I definitely think a thylacine at some point is going to be found. There have been too many reports.
Yeah, I completely agree. Obviously, I know a couple of people that have been searching for the orang pendek several times, and I've seen some of the witnesses that live out there that have been interviewed. You know, these are primatologists, these are biologists, these are the people that know what animals look like. I just think it's some kind of undiscovered species of great ape, and it's, once again, as I said earlier on, sometimes the local population will be telling us about these things, but people don't listen.
Right.
And people have said in the past, oh, well, they've just probably misidentified an orangutan. And they get really offended then and say, well, no, that's an orangutan. That's not an orang pendek. They are not the same thing.
Well, it's the same with Bigfoot. Oh, well, you just saw a bear on its hind legs. No, there's a little bit difference between a bear and a Bigfoot, especially, you know, in the lower states. All we have are black bears. And black bears don't grow big enough to be, you know, 8, 9, 10 feet tall when they stand up, and they don't have a running gait when they're on their back legs. Something else that you said, working at a university, I have the pleasure of having friends who are actual scientists. Yes. So have a beer with a physicist. That's great. A couple of my friends and I, this has been years ago, we're talking ghosts. And they said, there's no evidence that ghosts exist. We believe they do. And it's going to take people like us to prove it to other people. We need to be the ones out there discovering if there's actually ghosts, and not, you know, Jason Hawes on you know, Ghosted, whatever the show was. It's the same with this. Zoologist, primatologist, biologist. I was so happy years ago when Jeff, Utah State University, he's
Dr. Jeff
Meldrum, yes. When he came out and said Bigfoot exists, I'm gonna research it. We need more people, more academics like him, to get out there and announce, I'm doing this, and then actually go try and find something.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jane Goodall is of the opinion that while she can't prove it, she thinks that there's a lot to it.
Yep, I heard the interview. I listened to the interview where she said that. I'm trusting that woman with anything.
So David Attenborough is of the opinion that he also believes that there is a possibility that it exists. And so these aren't the run-of-the-mill people, as you said, you know, guys who go out at the weekends Bigfooting for a bit of fun. These are people that have spent their entire life surrounded by nature. It's their job. So why do we not treat them seriously?
I know. They should not be ridiculed. They should be treated, absolutely seriously, because they're not, Billy, Jim, Joe, Bob. I was out there in the woods drinking beer one afternoon, and I saw this big hairy thing, and it turned out to be my wife. I don't know. It's those we get reports like that, but it's the academics, and I believe them.
Absolutely. Well, listen, before I let you leave, as you've mentioned, this seems to be the second part of an ongoing series then. Jason, you're working, I imagine, right now on chasing the world's monsters. So have you been surprised at the amount of it? I would imagine, because like you say, you've covered near enough 500 cryptids in your first two cryptid books. Are you trying to hold the limit, damn the wall at 250 for the world, or are you pushing past that as you speak?
No, I actually have less. I have fewer monsters in chasing the world's monsters. I have about 175. My publisher wants a word count. I'm really, really hoping to have volume 2, to be allowed to have volume 3, because I've already collected, even though I've already written Chasing the World's Monsters, I've already collected enough new monsters to write the second volume already. But I have fewer monsters with Chasing the World's Monsters because I have to have Nessie. I've got to have the Yeti. I've got to have the big ones And I can't, what I've done with the first two books is, I don't know what they call them in the UK, but over here they're called toilet readers. Because you can sit on the toilet and read a little bit and come back later. But I wanted this to be an easy to read, but I had to go more in depth on the famous ones like Nessie. So fewer monsters, but again, more in depth.
Fabulous. Well, we'll all look forward to that based on your body of work so far, sir. So, Jason, first of all, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. It's been delightful to finally speak to you, and I hope it's not the last time I get a chance to have a chat with you about all things strange and unusual from around the world. Where can everybody find this particular book, your previous work? Because I know you've also done fiction as well as paranormal research as well, and along with your website.
Right. I have this is my Chasing North American Monsters is my second volume of cryptids. I have 4 books on ghosts. I have 6 novels that are out. A mix of science fiction, horror, and humor. I've got a travel log and some other funny stuff. I'm an enormous smart ass, and I can't help but write, put jokes places. But they can all be found on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. They can probably be found. Oh, I know they can be found in the UK as well because I've looked. Yes. They can also be found on my website, which is jasonoffutt.com.
Well, as I said, thank you again. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time in your company and have a light-hearted but very interesting conversation about our favourite monsters from around the North American area.
This has been an absolute pleasure, and I gauge an interview on how I feel when it's over. If I feel like I could go on longer and want to, then it was a good interview, and that's what this is. This has been terrific, just an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. You take care, and I hope we will speak soon, my friend. Take care.
I hope so. Take care.